Okay, I'll get a little bit into their physical culture and move away from the spiritual stuff so much. How did they live? Very typically, what we find archaeologically at the Oud site and the Gumbo Point site, which is were two of the main Missouria occupied sites that have been explored to some degree, we find two kinds of houses. We find what is called shikirathon, house tied together, which is, or more commonly we say wigwam. But here's a picture of an Osage framework showing it, which is shisu huge. And the willow poles are driven in the ground and tied over top, and then they overlaid it with mats made up of grass or cane mats, things of that nature. Then here's another one. This is Iowa. These two photos are from the Iowa, and that one, of course, Osage. This is Nahatchi, the bark house, and it's more of a gable type of a house, a square house. And that design actually kind of goes back to the earlier Mississippian and woodland period homes as well. So that were the two main types. Now some people say, well, did the Missourians use teepees? We don't know. We don't have any written records of it. We do know that after they left the state, went to Nebraska and joined the Oto tribe, they would have been using teepees, which they called shiva threje, house stands upright. And this picture from 1852, it says Oto buildings, but the Missourians are using them too. There's the Nahatchi, the bark house, the shiva threje, the house that stands upright, and there's the Mahatchi, the earth lodge. We did not have earth lodges around here. We get a little too much rain to make earth lodges very feasible. Plus we have a lot more vegetation down here to build your home out of, and when you got up to Nebraska and the Platte River, vegetation got a little more sparse. So, and you know, they made the house to fit their environment. Okay, now this is what most people, when you say American Indian, this is what most people picture. They picture Indians on horseback riding down and shooting buffalo. Well, most American Indians weren't doing this, but in the case of the Missouris, this is correct. I'll give you a few examples here. Henry Tonti, early explorer in 1682, describes the Missouri River, and he says, "It is well peopled. There are even villages of the savages which use horses to go to war and to carry away the carcasses of the cattle which they killed." That's considerably earlier than what I had been told. People said, well, horses weren't out in this area until very, very late. And this is pretty early, 1682, that Indians out here are riding horses to hunt buffalo. Okay. Another quote by Henry Tonti a couple of years later, he says, "Along this river and inland are several nations such as the Beatets, who are the Iowa, the Ototinta, who are the Oto, and the Missouria, the Missouria, where the buffalo, which are found everywhere in Louisiana, come from. The Indians have no other fuel than the dung of these animals." So here's one Indian tribe, particularly in Missouri, very local, and he says that's the only fuel they're using for buffalo. So what's that tell you about what we had around here historically? We have a lot of buffalo. Here's Jean-Claude de Tisnay, 1719. He was describing the little Osage whose village was within just a few miles of the Missouria village. And he said, "The little Osage stay in their village like the Mezorites and pass the winter in chasing the buffalo, which are very abundant in these parts. Horses, which they steal from the Pawnees, can be bought of them." Yes, horse raiding was big business out here. So here's a map I found, 1755, and here we are down here, Here's the bend, the Great Bend of the Missouri by Saline County. Here is the Rio Grande, the Grand River. And look what's up here. Extensive meadows full of buffaloes. This is the Moingüina River, the Des Moines River. Now I told you that why did the Missouria name people at River's Mouth? And they're talking about the Grand River. Why was that so important? Because I believe, and I think archaeology is starting to find more and more, that northern Missouri and southern Iowa was one big buffalo range, and the Grand River would you just followed it right into that buffalo hunting range. So that's why it was important for them to be at the mouth of the Grand River. Here's another map from 40 years later, 1796. Same thing, extensive meadow full of buffalo, elk, and deer up between the Des Moines and the headwaters of the Grand River. And of course this map showing the Missouri is living in what's now the north part of the state. So I believe that this along was the hunting ground of the Missouris and the Little Osage. And there was a good problem with that. The Missouris and the Little Osage are going up here to hunt. Well, the Sac and the Fox Indians from over in Illinois are coming west to go hunt in the same range, and they don't get along very well. It gets into a long, difficult war. This is a map, and this is going to be kind of hard for some of you in the back to see. But as I was doing research, these are all locations that I found where either officials of colonial governments, colonial France and Spain, mentioned the Missouria, or the Missourias actually visited in delegations. They appeared in Mobile, Alabama, Dauphin Island off the coast of Mobile, New Orleans, Natchitoches, Louisiana, Arkansas Post and Little Rock, Prophetstown, which was a Big Shawnee village in Indiana, Fort St. Louis. The whole tribe moved up there in 1682 with Robert LaSalle in about 1682 to 1702. And they show up at Prairie du Chien in Wisconsin. So they really got around quite a bit. Here we're going to kind of follow where they came from. The Shawari-speaking people, by their own tradition and archaeology, they seem to appear, they do appear, up in the Green Bay, Wisconsin area. And at first, the Ho-Chunk, the Winnebago, the Missouri, the Iowas, and the Otos, they're all one big tribe. And then gradually, they begin breaking up and moving out. By 1400, there's a big colony of Aniota villages and sites in northeast Iowa. We call these ore phase sites, and we can find a lot of connections and changes in the pottery going on. Then from about 1450 to 1792, they're down here in central Missouri in the Big Bend of the Missouri River here. From about 1793 to 1853, they're up on the map by the mouth of the Platte River in Nebraska. There we go. 1854 to 1881, reservation on the Big Blue River on the Kansas-Nebraska border. And, whoops, it's really going crazy on me. And then 1881 to today, they're down in Red Rock, Oklahoma, which is down here kind of north central Oklahoma. So that kind of gives you an idea of how they migrated over the course of centuries, literally. Now, I mentioned to you things about stealing horses. They stole horses from the Pawnees. They also went out and raided the Paducah out here in southwestern Kansas. The Paducah were Plains Apaches, and they eventually were run out of this area by the depredations of the Osage, the Missouris, and the Comanches moving down out of the mountains. So the Apaches, some of the Apaches were here and moved on down into Texas and New Mexico eventually. But they were raiding them for slaves. The French were paying the Missouris and the Osage to capture slaves for them, and they were sending them down here to work in the Delta area or in the sugarcane fields. So slave raiding actually became a big business. And, you know, because they had an incentive, they got guns, they got all kinds of trade goods that made life a little easier and better for them by raiding. And the French nurtured and encouraged that, even though by French law it was illegal to do that. Out in the colonies, the Frenchmen were doing whatever the heck they wanted to make a buck. They didn't care what King Louis decreed back in France. About the same time, they're raiding the cattle and Indians down here in the Red River of Texas, the Missouris and the Osages, for horses. There's several notations by colonial governors complaining that the Missouris are going down here and getting horses. They're disrupting the trade in Natchitoches. 1712, the Fox Indians weren't too impressed with the French efforts to run the fur trade, and they kind of wanted a bigger piece of the pie. So they got at odds with France, and they besieged Fort Pontchartrain at Detroit. The French down here in Fort Chart recruited the Missouris and the Osage and the Illinois Indians to go up to Detroit and break the siege, and rescue the French up there. And this started a very, very bitter war that was going to have disastrous consequences for the Missouri with Fox. 1730, most of the Fox were moved over here to Illinois. They were attacked again and besieged, and the Missouri has played a big role in the attack, and the Fox were nearly exterminated in that battle. 1734, the Sauk Indians had moved out on the Des Moines River, and an armed group of 400 Kansas and Missouris went up to attack them. The Sauk scattered on the prairie, and the Missouria came back, and the French complained that they didn't do anything. They didn't kill any of the Sauk. Oh, they were content. The enemy ran away, and that was honorable enough. 1732 to 1740, France got in war with the Chickasaw Indians. Everybody says, oh, the French got along with the Indians. No, they got along with some Indians. Others they didn't. The Chickasaws and the Missouris, again, played a very important role in France's wars with the Chickasaw. Then in 1825, I found a raid at the base of Pikes Peak. Some Oto Missouris and Pawnees went down and raided horses from the Arapahoes at the base of Pikes Peak. So what I'm showing you, I missed Fort Duquesne up here. 1755, French and Indian War. General Sir Edward Braddock led a big expedition. He was going to push the French out of the Great Lakes. The French got all their Indian allies, including the local Missouris and Osage, and they went up and annihilated his expedition. So there were local Osages and Missouris in that battle in 1755.